Sorin Baiasu's excellent texts present a strong argument against the idea that a Kantian machine could create cognitive agents. Such a machine would provide a way to solve a long-standing problem of cognitive science, namely the problem of how it is possible to make sense of a huge amount of information. To achieve this goal, Baiasu uses quite adequately, in my opinion, the Kantian argument of the unity of apperception, and shows that this argument presents certain conditions for the rules that Kant calls categories that could hardly be fulfilled by the Kantian machine. According to this argument, the link of synthesis established by the categories depends on the synthetic originary unity of apperception. In other words, Baiasu affirms, quote, that combining through rules is necessary for my experience, but it is not sufficient. Hence, it might be sufficient to equip a computer with rules which enable it to respond better to various tasks than other computers usually do, but from here to getting the computer to count its sensings as it's representing the external world is a gap that, at least for Kant, requires self-consciousness. End of quote. This is a quote of the text in the book Kant and the IE. Thus, a Kantian machine, at least, could not account for how cognitive agents could be produced. I would now like to supplement this straightforward consequence that Baiasu draws from the argument of the transcendental deduction of the categories by another point connected with this argument in Kant's work. Unfortunately, Baiasu does not consider this connection, perhaps for reason of space, or perhaps because he interprets the Kantian text in a different way. However, since I have deep agreement with the way Baiasu interprets the Kantian passages he refers to, I think my remarks complement and do not contradict his excellent interpretation. Finally, I'd like to emphasize that, in my opinion, the argument I will discuss below is directly connected with the expression, the ambiguity of which some of the authors of the book that brings us together here rightly complain about making sense. To begin with, let me quote briefly Kant's critique of pure reason. Quote, but in addition to the concept of the manifold and of its synthesis, the concept of combination also carries with it the concept of the unity of the manifold. Combination is the representation of the synthetic unity of the manifold. The representation of this unity cannot therefore arise from the combination, rather by being added to the representation of the manifold. It first makes the concept of combination possible. This unity, which precedes all concept of combination a priori, is not the former category of unity, paragraph 10. For all categories are grounded on logical functions in judgments, but in this combination, thus the unity of given concepts is already thought. The category, therefore, already presupposes combination. We must therefore seek this unity as qualitative, paragraph 12, some place higher, namely, in that which itself contains the ground of the unity of different concepts in judgments, and hence of the possibility of the understanding even in its logical use. This is a quote, end quote. The quote is taken from the Critique of Pure Reason, pages B 113 and 131. The Kantian argument here is as follows. The combination, Verbindung, cannot be given to us by the senses, nor can it be contained in the form of sensible intuition. This combination presupposes the linking of the manifold into a unity. This unity, however, cannot be the fruit of the combination, but the combination presupposes this unity. This unity is therefore not the category of unity introduced in paragraph 10, but must be sought in a higher place. Kant quotes here paragraph 12, where a reference to the doctrine of the transcendental predicates is introduced in the version of the second edition of the work. To the philosophically trained, these predicates are familiar: ens, unum, bonum, verum, aliquid, res, etc. etc. They would be predicates convertible with being, namely predicates corresponding to all that is. Kant, who used to teach the doctrine of the transcendentals as it was presented in the school metaphysics textbooks prescribed for teaching by the Prussian Ministry of Education, does not mention these predicates in the first edition of the Critique of Pure Reason, but he does introduce them in the second edition, where he also adds this important reference to them, and in particular to that of unity in the framework of his new version of the argument of the transcendental deduction of the categories. Now, what are these predicates? They are not in any case concept of objects, that is, categories, but requisites and criterion of cognition of things in general. Kant restricts the transcendental predicates to consider three: unity, truth, goodness. For obvious reasons, I will restrict myself here to the brief remarks Kant makes on the predicate of unity, which is, as we saw in the deduction, the one that is at the basis of combination. Kant says the following, quote, "In every cognition of an object, there is namely unity of the concept, which one calls qualitative unity insofar as by that only the unity of the comprehension of the manifold of cognition is thought as, say, the unity of them in a play, speech, or a fable." End quote. B 114. The text suggests that at the basis of combination, which in turn is at the basis of the possibility of categories, there is a unity which would consist in the unity of the theme in a play, a speech, or a fable. The unity of experience, which is nothing other than what is meant by self-consciousness, has precisely this form of one thing following another with a sense, that is, with a direction, such as occurs in a play or in a narrative, which is what Kant calls qualitative unity. I mean here, sense, namely with a direction, take the etymological meaning of sense. One of these etymological meanings is direction, Richtung. And so I think that it's very interesting here that Kant takes this unity in this form, like the unity of a story, a fable, and that means to me a unity that has a sort of direction. Our experience goes in one direction, like time with its arrow pointing forward, so to speak. So I think here we have a sort of originary intentionality a way of making sense of things, of which I think computers, Kantian machines, in the way that presented Professor Evans, for example, in his interesting paper in the book, are not capable. And this unity is given by this higher unity of the paragraph 12 of the Critique of Pure Reason, as this unity of a team in a play, speech, or fable. In a story, events follow one another in such a way that they make sense, keeping a unity among themselves like an animal, as Aristotle said in the Poetics. Here I want just to point to a second feature of this unity, not this directionality, but this animal character, so to speak. This unity is not only given by a subject, but also by something presupposed by the fact that there is a subject, namely that the magnitude of the animal allows it to be captured. This is a sort of crypto quote of the Poetics, Aristotle's Poetics. The reference that Aristotle makes to the megatos of the story tell in a play. This way of giving unity is the central crucial is then crucial in order to give a more specific qualification of the idea of making sense of a multiplicity. Indeed, our experience makes sense not only because we apply rules such as those of the categories, but also because these rules are employed by appealing to a framework of significations that are not given by the objects, but are projected by us. I would add now as beings living in time, who tries to make sense of a unity like an animal from the perspective of this life in time. These meaningful frames enable us to focus our attention on what is relevant in the multiple information received. Now, where does our ability to project meaning onto things come from? This is not the place to give an answer, but I suspect that this capacity is directly linked to our animal nature, that is, to the need we have to interpret the environment in order to be able to act in it by surviving, reproducing, and caring for our offspring. If this is correct, then the task of making a Kantian machine into a cognitive agent becomes more complex, since it would seem, from this perspective, that there is an intrinsic connection between what a cognitive agent is capable of, the capacity to possess intentional states, and the need to deal with the world in the struggle for survival and preservation of the species. However, this view seems to go beyond the strictly Kantian framework. Indeed, those who look to Kant for inspiration for cognitive architectures based on Kantian machines are supported by the fact that Kant does not seem to have treated reason as a disposition proper only to living beings. Apart from the various organic metaphors that Kant sometimes uses to refer to what he calls reason, interest of reason, etc., it is true that Kant hardly develops this idea. Indeed, his conception of a rational being does not seem to be directly linked to that of a living being, which leaves room for the imagination to entertain itself by designing Kantian machines. Thank you.